Good afternoon and sorry for the delay. Okay, so let's start with the discussion. So same thing, I will be starting with today's topics and I will be going to the previous phase. So this will be the first topic for today. So this first topic is about the Nameri Tiger Reserve in Assam, and the context is that Nameri Tiger Reserve in Assam have seen the increase in tiger population. So how it could happen, what were the reasons? So for example, the local conservation systems were very good, right? The people were easily able to protect the habitat of tigers. Because of all these things, the population of tiger increased in Nameri Tiger Reserve. So first thing, I think number, it's not important to remember that population increased from what number to what number. Just since we are discussing context, so I will discuss in brief that tiger population in Assam have increased, in Assam's Nameri Tiger Reserve have increased from 3 tigers which were in 2022 to around 12 tigers in 2025. And this information was given by the Wildlife Institute of India. So if we talk from prelims perspective, what all things are important? So first thing will be that you have to discuss few basic facts about Nameri Tiger Reserve. That what is the location, right? And how the population could increase, what are the important rivers passing from that protected area. Because when you read any protected area, these are the many things you have to remember. First of all, you have to remember the location. So please see the location on the map. After that, you have to remember if any important river is passing through that protected area. After that, important flora and fauna, that means animals and plants. These are the basic things you discuss when you read about any protected area. So, first thing you will be discussing about this Nameri Tiger Reserve. After that, this information was validated by Wildlife Institute of India. So, whenever any body is in news, so you will be discussing about that body also. That body comes under which ministry, whether it is statutory or not, in which year it was formed, these many things. And here in the context, another significant achievement was the return of 2 tigers to the Sonai Rupai Wildlife Sanctuary. So here second important achievement, this Sonai Rupai Wildlife Sanctuary is also located in Assam. So this was also significant achievement that 2 tigers have returned to their habitat. Tigers will return to their habitat only when they found their habitat very good, right? They will return to their habitat only then. If the prey management is very good, if the forests are available, if the water management is available, then only tigers will return to their habitat. So first you will be discussing about Nameri Tiger Reserve, then you will discuss about Sonai Rupai Wildlife Sanctuary, and then we will discuss about the Wildlife Institute of India. So first of all, here we discussed that this is a significant achievement for Assam. So first of all, I would like to ask that why the increase in tiger population is considered as significant for any protected area. Yes. In short, I am asking the significance of increase in tiger population. Why tigers are important for that environment or for that ecosystem? Yes. No, I am saying if in this area number of tigers have increased, then how this area will benefit from that increase in number? Very good. How? Yeah, this is the answer, ecosystem balance, but how? Basically, you are talking about the food chain, right? Yes. What you were saying? The same thing. Yes, very good. So, you have to understand, whenever in the context it is given that number of tigers, number of lions, number of snow leopards have increased, this is a significant achievement for any area. So, please don't just leave that line as it is. Please understand why that thing was significant. So, here first of all we will discuss why the increase in the number of tigers was significant. So, here if I talk, so here the keyword is the umbrella species, because tiger is considered as an umbrella species. Umbrella species means a species which requires wider area as well as its requirements are of lot of resources. So here tiger will require a lot of resource, tiger will require a lot of area to survive. So it's so only not because of that we are considering it umbrella species, we are considering it as umbrella species because if tiger will survive, many other things will survive. Because first thing is tigers want to migrate, right? Tigers won't be living in very small area in forest. They will be migrating from forest to forest. So first, for that, what you will do? First of all, you will conserve the forest, right? So in that way, you will conserving the forest. Second thing, if you want the tigers to survive, you need prey management, right? If what all animals tiger is eating, at least you have to manage those animals, right? So in that way, those animals will also survive. And for those animals to survive, you have to look after those animals' needs also. So in that way, what is happening? Because of tiger, the forest is surviving. The nearby species, the species on which tiger is feeding is surviving. So because of that, tiger is known as umbrella species. Understood? What is the concept of umbrella species? So because of that, we could say that this is a very significant achievement for Assam. Now, next coming to the Nameri Tiger Reserve. So before discussing the points, first of all, let's go through the location. Where is Nameri Tiger Reserve? So is it visible? This is complete Northeast India, right? It is visible. This is Northeast India. So if we talk about the Nameri Tiger Reserve, so it is located somewhere here. So it is located near the border with Arunachal Pradesh. Understood? This is Arunachal Pradesh. This is Assam. This is Meghalaya. So here, somewhere here, Nameri Tiger Reserve is located. And whenever you see for the location of any tiger reserve, please see if any important river is passing through that or not. So see, here is Nameri Tiger Reserve and somewhere here is located Brahmaputra. So if in question UPSC gives the statement that Brahmaputra river passes through Nameri Tiger Reserve, will the answer be correct or not? Why? This is Nameri Tiger Reserve, this is Brahmaputra, it's not passing through Nameri Tiger Reserve. This is Nameri Tiger Reserve and this blue line is of Brahmaputra. Yes? This blue line is of Kameng River. This is Kameng River and this is Brahmaputra River. Understood? So maybe you don't remember the name of actual name of that river which is passing through that area, but at least now you are well known of this fact that at least very big rivers or known rivers are not passing through this area. So maybe you don't know about Kameng River, but Brahmaputra is well known river. So at least now you know that at least Brahmaputra is not passing, rest I don't know. So if UPSC give the statement that Brahmaputra passes through this protected area, answer will be no, right? Now, yes, I will be coming to this map again. Let's discuss some of the facts. So first thing, if I ask you that Nameri Tiger Reserve is located in which state? That will be Assam. Now in Assam also it is located in northern Sonitpur district of Assam. Maybe the district is not important, but since we are discussing, we will be discussing the details. It is located in Assam in Sonitpur district. Now it is located near the foothills of Arunachal Pradesh. Just now we discussed that it is located with the border of Arunachal Pradesh. Next thing is, it shares its northern boundary with Pakke Tiger Reserve, creating a continuous habitat. So see, please focus. This is the border of Arunachal Pradesh, right? And somewhere here is located the Pakke Tiger Reserve. So Pakke Tiger Reserve is located in Arunachal Pradesh. Nameri is located in Assam, but they are sharing the habitat. So if we talk about protected area, it's not like if it is protected area located in one state, then it will be restricted to one state. It can be spreaded to 2 or 3 states. That's why it shares its habitat with Pakke Tiger Reserve. Yes, after that, the reserve comprises, now please, you have to focus on this also. Any tiger reserve or any biosphere reserves will be consisting of 2 or 3 important protected areas. So the names you have to remember, that what all protected areas comes under this. So the river comprises of Nameri National Park, first thing. Second is Sonai Rupai Wildlife Sanctuary. In the context we discussed, that in Sonai Rupai Wild Sanctuary, 2 tigers have returned. So first is Nameri National Park, second is Sonai Rupai Wildlife Sanctuary. After that, Nandor and Balipara Reserve Forest. So these are the 3 important protected areas under Nameri Tiger Reserve. Next thing, we will be discussing about the river. Which river passes through it? Name of the river is Jia Bhoreli. Maybe you don't remember this name, but at least you know that Brahmaputra and other important rivers don't pass. Since we are discussing, please remember the river which passes through this is Jia Bhoreli River. So it will be to the west and Bor Dekorai River to the east. So if this is Nameri Tiger Reserve, which will be the river to its west? Jia Bhoreli. And to the east? Bordicorite reserve. Now let's discuss some of the vegetation as well as animals. So see how you will remember the vegetations and animals. See, whenever you look for any forest or any protected area, you know the basic kind of vegetations, right? Like the evergreen forest, right? Tropical forest, deciduous forest, dry forest. So if any particular kind of forest is present, that will be easy to remember. But since this area is consisting of many kind of forest, UPSC won't be asking this. So see here it consists of tropical evergreen, semi-evergreen, moist deciduous, grasslands, etc. etc. So these type of questions at least UPSC will not ask in prelims. Even if it asks, so you must have an idea that no single kind of forest is present. So if with respect to Nameri Tiger Reserve, UPSC asks that the complete area is covered by evergreen forest, answer will be wrong because many kind of forests are present here. If I talk about the fauna, so many types of fauna are found here. For example, white-winged wood duck or the leopard cat or common otter, etc. etc. So no single kind of fauna is famous in that region. So maybe UPSC won't be asking this, but at least for tigers you must remember. Yes, now let's focus on the other tiger reserve, because see, this tiger reserve just now we discussed. So since we are discussing about Assam, so you must have a basic idea about how many other tiger reserves are present in that state. So apart from Nameri, we have 3 other tiger reserves. First is Kaziranga, second is Manas, and third is Orang. So here look for Kaziranga. So Kaziranga is located here. This is Brahmaputra, and to the south bank of river Brahmaputra is located Kaziranga National Park. After that we will be seeing for Orang. So here located Orang, and this is Brahmaputra. So Orang is located on the northern bank of river Brahmaputra. This is Brahmaputra, this is Orang, this is Brahmaputra, this is Kaziranga, this is Brahmaputra, this is Nameri, and one more, that is Manas. So Manas is also located at the northern bank of river Brahmaputra. So now tell me, out of these 4 tiger reserves, how many of them are located to the northern end of river Brahmaputra? How many? Name them. Manas, Nameri, and yes, Orang. And which one is at the south? That is Kaziranga. Yes, now in context we discussed that Wildlife Institute of India have provided this information about the increase in population. So let's discuss few things about that. First of all, year is important, that in which year it was established. So it was established in year 1982. Understood? Second is its headquarters, where the headquarters are located. Wildlife Institute of India. So headquarters are located in Dehradun, Uttarakhand. Ministry, obviously, which will be the ministry? Ministry of Environment. And functions, I think functions are very obvious. Functions will be related to wildlife research, or functions will be related to estimation of population, etc. etc. Yes, so any doubt in the previous article? No, right? Now coming to the second article, and that article is about Article 371. So here basically the news, I have to change it again and again. This will take a lot of time. Okay, so here the news discusses about Ladakh. So as you already know that from past many months, Ladakh is demanding from central government to be included under 6th schedule. So if you are reading the news, do you have basic idea why Ladakh is demanding the inclusion in the 6th schedule? Yes? Huh? No, if you have read the news, so I will continue from there. That's why I'm asking. Yes, they are demanding the statehood. So that's what I'm asking. Why they are demanding the statehood? No idea? Okay, so I will start here then. So see, first thing is about the context. So context is the Ministry of Home Affairs have proposed a customized constitutional framework under Article 371 for Ladakh. So see, let's discuss the background first. See, as you already know, what happened in 2019? there was bifurcation of this area and 2 union territories were created. One union territory was of Jammu Kashmir, second was of Ladakh. Now, out of these 2 new union territories, Jammu Kashmir have its own legislative assembly. That means legislative assembly of that area can take decisions on their own. But Ladakh became the union territory without legislative assembly. So see, if we talk about union territories, anyhow they will be under the control of central government only. Even if they have state legislative assembly, then also the final call will be of central government. That's why they are called as union territories. So if we talk about Jammu Kashmir, at least state legislative assembly will take some of their own decisions. But now the problem with Ladakh is that complete autonomy is destroyed. Okay, they don't have any independence and all the decisions are taken by the central government. Now the point of Ladakh is that in Ladakh more than 90% of population belongs to tribal community, right? Second thing about Ladakh is that people there are fearful that since central government is controlling our area, then locals might lose their job, right? Locals might lose their land. Because central government will think about their own benefit, maybe the people in Ladakh are thinking. So that's why they are saying that under 6th schedule, please put Ladakh under 6th schedule, because the 4 states are there under 6th schedule, right? That I will be discussing. 4 northeastern states are under 6th schedule. So because of the inclusion in 6th schedule, they are having a lot of independence. Whatever they want, they can do. According to their independence. So that's why people of Ladakh are also demanding that please include us also in 6th schedule, so that we can save our land, we can save our employment, as well as we can save the tribal culture here. So here, now what Home Ministry has said, now please read the conclusion, I think now you will understand. Now Home Ministry has said that instead of including Ladakh in the 6th schedule, we are proposing a customized constitutional framework under Article 371 of the Constitution. So Ladakh is saying include us in the 6th schedule, but Ministry is saying maybe we cannot include you in the 6th schedule, but we can make a customized plan for you. Understood? Customized means just for you. So here the word in the context is used, the word which is used is sui generis. Sui generis means unique or custom made. So this is the word which is used in the context. So Ministry of Home Affairs is saying instead of including you in the 6th schedule, I will make a separate constitutional provision for you under Article 371 of the Constitution. This we will be discussing, that why Home Ministry is not including in the 6th schedule and why they are putting it under Article 371. Yes, we are done with this. Yes. So now let's start discussion about Article 371 of the Constitution. So if we talk about Article 371 of the Constitution, so it comes, first thing is it comes under Part 21 of the Constitution. You know, you have these ideas, right? That Constitution have articles. These articles are part of bigger thing that we call as parts or schedules, right? So Article 371 of the Constitution comes under Part 21. The name of Part 21 is Temporary, Transitional as well as Special Provisions. So that's why, since Home Ministry is saying that we will be making the special provisions for Ladakh, that's why these all things are, that's why Home Ministry have included in Part 21 of the Constitution. Because Part 21 is related to temporary, transitional as well as special provisions. Now, what is the subject of Article 371? So see, Article 371 is not a single article. Article 371 have many sub-articles. So Article 371 as well as its sub-articles provide the special provisions for certain states because of various things. Maybe those states are having a lot of tribal population. Maybe they have some distinct culture, difficult geography, some of the historical circumstances, any kind of need. So if you want to provide any special provision to any state, so it will be included under Article 371 of the Constitution. So it has Article 371, 371A, 371B and so on and so forth. I think around 12 states are already included under Article 371 of the Constitution. So here maybe after 371J, Union Ministry will include one more article as a subpart under Article 371. Yes, so these are those. These are the 12 states which are included under Article 371 of the Constitution. So here I won't be discussing each and every article, just I am giving you an idea. So go back home, open the Constitution, open Article 371. So it starts from 371, ends with 371J. So if we talk about 371, so consider, for example, it is related to special provisions with respect to the states of Maharashtra and Gujarat. Next, 371A, special provisions with respect to the state of Nagaland. So based on the demand of any state, those states will be keep on including under Article 371 of the Constitution. Now, next topic comes is that why they are not including, why Union government is not including Ladakh in the 6th schedule, why they are demanding under 371. So if we talk about the 6th schedule of the Constitution, so it includes only 4 states of Northeast India. Right? What are those 4 states? Yes, Meghalaya. It has 4 states. See, one is, yes, Arunachal. In this way, you will say all the 7 states. It includes just the 4 states of Northeast India. You are saying Assam, Nagaland, Mizoram and Meghalaya. So this is correct. This is incorrect. One is Tripura. And so this is correct, this is correct. 2 more. It's Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura and Mizoram. Understood? There are 4 states: Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura and Mizoram. AMTM in this form you can remember. So here Home Ministry is saying that we made 6th schedule of the Constitution just for the northeastern states. So under 6th schedule, northeastern states have certain kind of provisions, and all those 4 northeastern states have similar kind of problems. That's why we could include them under 6th schedule. But the problem of Ladakh and the geographical region of Ladakh is completely different. So that's why it is very logical that if you want to include any state from some other region, it is very logical that we must include that under Article 371. But because under Article 371, many other states are there. North states also, central states also, southern states also. That's why it becomes logical. So why not 6th schedule? Because it was mainly focusing on the northeastern states of India. Yes, so let's have a quick comparison between Article 371 as well as 6th schedule. So first, if we talk about Article 371, so it provides special constitutional safeguards to other states, right? And if we talk about the 6th schedule, so it provides constitutional safeguards to 4 states, and under constitutional safeguards, there is a provision of autonomous districts council. Autonomous districts councils are present only under 6th schedule of the Constitution. Even you will not find them under 5th schedule also. Under 5th schedule also many tribal areas are there, but this is the provision only for the 6th schedule of the Constitution. And autonomous district councils have a lot of independence. That's why Ladakh is also demanding to be included under 6th schedule. Next thing is, if we talk about Article 371, so special thing about this article is there will be tailor-made provisions for each state. Understood? So under 6th schedule, all those 4 states have same kind of provisions. But if you want different states have different kind of provisions, no uniformity, then that state must be included under Article 371 of the Constitution. But here what is happening? Uniform constitutional framework for notified tribal areas. Same kind of provisions on all 4 states, but here each and every state have different kind of provisions. So you understood? Even if in future some other state demands some other union territory starts demanding statehood, So that union territory will be included in under which 6th schedule or 371? Understood, right? Because it is providing the customized framework. Yes, now tell me why Ladakh is strategically important? Yes, very good. So Ladakh is sharing the international borders, that's why it becomes more important. Because if you ignore Ladakh completely, then China would be building the infrastructure there. China would be coming to the Indian territory, and it will be building the infrastructure, and it will be changing the map of India. So that's why in this way you can say that Ladakh is strategically important. Yes, now coming to the next article. So this article is about Defence Acquisition Council. So the news is that Defence Acquisition Council have provided the acquisition proposal to procure many of the defence equipments. Context may not be much important, but the important thing is, first thing is the context. So context is, the Defence Acquisition Council have approved the acceptance of necessity for defence procurement proposal. So here first thing you must discuss about the Defence Acquisition Council, that what is that body. Second thing, you must have a basic idea about the acceptance of necessity. What is acceptance of necessity? Because generally UPSC can ask these words in exam. That the word acceptance of necessity was in news recently. It is related to what? 1, 2, 3, 4 options. So please have the basic idea of the new terms which are coming in news. Yes, so quickly let's start discussion about this Defence Acquisition Council. So first thing is, obviously under which ministry it will come? Defence Acquisition Council will come under Ministry of Defence. After that, if we talk about the function, so it is the highest decision making body of the Defence Ministry on procurement. So if you want to procure any drones or any tanks, any rockets, anything, this will be the final body for the procurement. Now next thing is, if we talk about the objective, so majorly its objective will be to ensure the expeditious procurement of the approved requirements of the armed forces. So 3 armed forces we have. So if any of the armed forces demands that we want all these kind of equipments, we want the rockets, drones, anything, any kind of machinery, so this will be the final body. If we talk about the formation, about the background, how this body was formed. So this body was formed post Kargil war. So at least please remember this. This body was formed after 1999 post Kargil war. It was formed after the group of ministers' recommendations on the reforming the national security system in 2001. So maybe you don't remember all these things, but at least please remember that this body was formed post Kargil war in 1999. Next thing is about the composition. This is important part about the prelims. What will be the composition about Defence Acquisition Council? So first of all, about the chairman. Who will be the chairman? The Defence Minister will be the chairman of Defence Acquisition Council. After that, so chairman is the Defence Minister. After that, this is very important, that the Chief of Defence Staff is also an important member of Defence Acquisition Council. Because Chief of Defence Staff is the recent post, right? It won't be, no, it didn't exist before 10 years or 20 years back. That's why from exam perspective, please all remember that apart from Defence Minister and apart from the chiefs of different army sections, for example, Army, Navy or Air Force, apart from that, Chief of Defence Staff is also important member of Defence Acquisition Council. Next thing, if we talk about the functions of DAC, so first of all, please remember the concept of the acceptance of necessity. What is the concept of acceptance of necessity? So for example, I am one of the member of army and I suggest Defence Ministry that my army demands these kind of machineries. So first of all, Defence Ministry will look for the necessity, that whether actual necessity is there or not. Second thing, whether we have that technical capability so that we can operate that machinery. And third thing, whether we have sufficient budget to buy that machinery or not. After analyzing those things, ministry will give kind of approval, and if ministry is giving acceptance of necessity, that means ministry is approving that procurement can be done. It's not like procurement has been started. Acceptance of necessity means approval has been given for the procurement. Later on, procurement will be done. Understood? What is acceptance of necessity? Yes, so I think mainly we discussed main things. Okay. Yes. Now next article is related to human papilloma virus vaccine, that is HPV vaccine. So here the context is the Prime Minister of India have launched human papilloma virus vaccination program for girls aged 14 years. So here we will be discussing about the virus, about the disease. So here please remember that this vaccination program, HPV vaccination program, is started from which place? So it was started from Ajmer in Rajasthan. At least this place is important. Yes, so now let's start discussion about human papilloma virus. So first important thing is about the transmission only. What will be the mode of transmission about human papilloma virus? So the mode of transmission, important mode of transmission will be, it is the sexually transmitted infection. Please remember, if you discuss about any disease, all the modes of transmission are important. So here, for example, it is sexually transmitted. After a few points we will discuss that it can be transmitted through skin to skin contact also. So all the modes of transmission are important for the prelims, and especially HPV vaccine will become very, very important because our country is making lot of efforts for the development of this vaccine. So at least HPV vaccine, human papilloma virus, will become very important at least for next year. So first thing is, what is the mode of transmission? So the main mode of transmission is the sexual transmission. After that, there are more than 100 types of human papilloma virus. So you don't need to remember all the 100 types of human papilloma virus. Point here is that maybe sometimes that virus is present inside your body, but maybe in your entire lifetime that virus will not affect you. So it's not like if virus is present in your body, all the people will be having that cervical cancer or any big disease. No. 50 or 60% times it will happen that virus enters your body, and through some mode it will leave your body also. It won't affect you. That's why there are 100 types of human papilloma virus, but our government or any government will be focusing only on those types which will be causing cervical cancer or any big disease. Understood? So here we will not be focusing on all the 100 types, we will be focusing on 3 or 4 important types. So here, as I discussed, that most of the virus will not cause any health problems. However, some types of virus infections can cause skin growth. They are called warts. Genital warts. Genital warts means some kind of skin growth will happen, and eventually it will lead to cervical cancer. Next thing is, more than 95% of cervical cancer is caused by human papilloma virus. So what is the important issue which happens because of human papilloma virus? That is cervical cancer in females. Next thing is, about 80% of people, that is both men and women, will get an HPV infection at some point in their lives. So but all those boys or girls, all those men or women won't be affected by human papilloma virus. Maybe some of them will get affected, and some of the females will be diagnosed with cervical cancer. Yes, after that comes the mode of transmission. So I think mode of transmission, first mode of transmission I already discussed, that was the sexual contact. Second will be the skin to skin intimate contact. So please remember, these are the two modes of transmission of human papilloma virus. Now if I ask you the question, does it spread through the food, water or the casual touching? So answer will be no. So this will be the complete know-how of how it spreads. Yes. Now next thing. Yes, most people with HPV don't know that they are infected and never develop symptoms. So please remember that all the time symptoms might not be developed. In some of the cases only symptoms will be developed. After that, the body most often clears the virus before it causes. This also I discussed that many a times it will leave your body without even infecting you. Yes. Now symptoms may include symptoms also I did. Yes. Now this thing is important, that is the treatment. So please remember that there is no cure for human papilloma virus. Then you will ask that we are providing vaccination. So and any vaccination will be suitable or it will be effective only before the disease. Because vaccine is a kind of curative measure. Vaccine is a kind of preventive measure. It's not a curative measure. So if I am saying that human papilloma virus does not have any cure, so we know that it does not have any cure, so we have to prevent it. How you will prevent it? You will prevent it through the vaccination. Yes. Next thing is that just now we discussed in the context that this vaccination is given only to the girls who are around 14-15 years. So what is the reason for that? So important reason here is that in that age the immunity level will be very strong. So that's why your body will start fighting with that virus and your body will generate the immunity. Second thing is 14 years or 15 years is the early adolescence age. So in that age, many a times or many youths won't be starting the physical contact. So because of these two reasons, human papilloma virus is given in that age, because your body have to generate immunity towards the human papilloma virus. Because when you talk about any vaccine, so vaccine will, if we are creating vaccine for any virus, that vaccine will be containing that part of that virus, right? You understood what I am saying? If you want to create vaccine for any virus, that vaccine will also contain part of that virus. Then only, first of all, your body will start fighting towards that virus, and when actual virus will be entering your body know how to respond. So that's why you must provide this vaccine to those persons who have very high immunity level. Yes. Now, next thing is that why Indian government is focusing more and more on human papilloma virus vaccination. So, important thing here is that India has one of the largest burdens of cervical cancer. That's why our government is focusing more and more on the vaccination. Yes. Now, next thing is, this thing is very important for the prelims. Does the vaccine contain live virus? Does human papilloma virus vaccination contains live virus? Yes or no? First of all, tell me how vaccine is made. Yes? Any basic idea? Because you all went through the COVID phase also. So you have the idea that COVID vaccine was also under the development. So how a vaccine is made? Any idea? Any rough idea? No? Okay, so I will start with the basic then. So see, if I talk about vaccination, no? For example, this is virus A, right? This virus has affected your body. Now, Indian government saw this situation, and now this situation is very bad. So government is considering that we should prevent it. So for prevention, we will be creating the vaccine. The concept of vaccine is, if I want to create the vaccine for this virus, vaccine means that the drug which will be killing this virus, right? So in that vaccine, what I will do, in that vaccine, I will take the part of this virus only. This virus will be present in that vaccine also. So what will happen if I inject this vaccine in my body, right? So when this vaccine enters your body, when any foreign antigen enters your body, your immunity will respond. Your immune system will respond. It will release all the B cells, T cells, all the immune cells it will release. So your body will start fighting towards that virus. So this is the first exposure of your body towards the virus. So here your body is learning how to respond to that virus. Your body has learned through the vaccination. Now when actual human papilloma virus or any virus will enter your body knows how to respond to that virus, because earlier your body learned how to fight towards that virus. Understood? This is the concept of vaccination. But now it depends what kind of vaccine it is. So some kind of vaccines contain live virus. Understood? In some kind of vaccination, you use the small component of live virus, which are not dead. In some kind of vaccination, you use weakened virus. That virus is not completely killed, but that virus is not that active. Because in some case, if you inject active virus inside the body, your body won't be able to fight against it. But what is the reason why we are injecting that microorganism only? Because your body must know that how to fight. That's why entering that microorganism in your body, it is important. Then only your body will know. So either that virus or any microorganism can be live, it can be weakened. Two kind of vaccines can be there. Third kind of vaccine is the recombinant vaccine. Recombinant vaccine means the vaccine which is made through genetic engineering. So, for example, this is a virus. And all the virus, all the bacteria, any kind of microorganism have some kind of protein on its surface. So, if I do not want to use complete virus, either weakened or killed, what I will do, I will take small portion of the protein which is present at the surface of the virus and I will create my vaccine. Understood? So, first I created vaccine using live virus as it is. Second kind of vaccine, I weakened that virus and I created vaccine as it is. Third is, I am not using virus, I am just using the small part of the protein of that virus. And that kind of vaccine is known as recombinant vaccine. So actually recombinant vaccine are more effective because sometimes if I inject entire virus in your body, maybe your body will not learn to respond and that virus will infect you. That's why many a times recombinant vaccines are very good because you are using the part of that virus but you are not using complete virus. So there is no risk of completely harming your body. Understood? So yes, if UPSC asks the question that what type of vaccine is the human HPV vaccine? So here the question is, does the vaccine contain live virus? So that answer will be no, it does not contain live virus. Then how this vaccine is made? This vaccine is made using recombinant technology. So now consider this virus as HPV virus or human papilloma virus. What I did, at the surface of human papilloma virus, I have some kind of protein. What I will do, I will take this protein and I will use, okay, I will write here. For example, I will use the protein which is present at the surface. Then what I will do, I will inject this protein inside a neutral bacteria or neutral yeast. These bacteria or yeast we are using in lab just for injecting the protein and multiplying the protein. Understood what I am saying? So there is no other use of this bacteria or yeast. I am using this bacteria or yeast as a lab sample. So what I will do, I will take this protein from here, I will inject in bacteria and yeast and I will multiply the protein. Now what will happen when I multiply this protein will be multiplied and this protein will combine itself together and it will look similar to the virus. It is not the complete virus, but the significance of this protein is it will show our body that I am the complete virus. So then our body will start learning that if virus will enter our body, what we will do. But since it is not the complete virus, it will not be able to affect our body. So we are not using complete virus, we are just using the layer of protein which is present on the outer layer of virus. Understood? So neither it is live vaccine, neither it is weakened vaccine. This vaccine is formed through recombinant DNA technology which contains just the protein which is present at the outer layer of the virus. Yes, next thing is, can males or boys also receive human papilloma virus vaccine? So what do you think? Should they receive or not? Because at present in India, only girls are receiving it. Yes, what is the reason? The reason is that since you already know that what is the mode of transmission in which both males and females are involved. So in that way you can consider that even if you vaccinate boys also, that will be good for females only, right? So here at present in India, we are not providing for the girls, but there are many examples in other countries, vaccination are being provided for males as well as females also. Yes. Now coming to the India's indigenous vaccine. So India already, what is happening? Yeah, so India already has its cervical cancer vaccine and that is known as CeraVac. So if UPSC asks the question in prelims, so let's discuss some prelims related points about CeraVac. So first thing about CeraVac is this is India's first indigenous developed quadrivalent human papilloma virus vaccine. Indigenous means completely developed in India. Second is quadrivalent human papilloma virus vaccine. So in the beginning I discussed that there are around 100 types of human papilloma virus, but most of them do not cause the disease. So here our government have identified 4 important types of HPV, and for those 4 HPV virus we have created the vaccine. That's why we are calling it as quadrivalent human papilloma virus vaccine. Quadrivalent means built for all the 4 types of HPV. Understood? So here these number of the types you won't have to remember. I am just telling that for these 4 types this CeraVac has been built. Second thing is, I think quadrivalent vaccine we already discussed. CeraVac is based on the virus-like particles similar to the hepatitis B vaccine. So when we were discussing vaccine, I told that when the proteins will multiply, those proteins will be combined together. When the proteins will combine, they will look like virus, but it won't be the complete virus. So this is the meaning of CeraVac is based on the virus-like particles. Those particles will look like virus, but it won't be the actual virus. So it is based on the virus-like particles, and for hepatitis B vaccination also, this is the similar mode of production for the vaccine. Yes, now coming to the FCRA as well as EOCI card. Okay, so here the news is the Home Ministry have taken 2 initiatives related to Financial Contribution Regulation Act, and next is the Overseas Citizens of India. Yes, so these are the 2 initiatives which were taken by the ministry. So first thing is, why Union Home Ministry have taken this initiative? Because foreign contribution regulation is done by the Ministry of Home Affairs, right? Foreign contribution means, for example, this is an NGO and this NGO is receiving the foreign funding. So who will allow this NGO to receive the foreign funding? That will be the Home Ministry. Second initiative is about the EOCI card or Overseas Citizens of India card. So this Overseas Citizens of India, all these things are also overseen by the Ministry of Home Affairs only. That's why this ministry have taken 2 initiatives. So first is about a portal and second is about the electronic OCI card. So here important thing is about the electronic OCI card. So let's start our discussion for that. So before discussing about the card, let's have a basic idea about the Overseas Citizens of India. So who are Overseas Citizens of India? Yes. So first thing is they are not Indian citizens. Please understand. OCI or the Overseas Citizens of India, they are not Indian citizens. If I talk about NRIs, are they Indian citizens? Next thing is, this Overseas Citizens of India or OCI card provides the lifelong visa as well as several facilities to eligible persons of Indian origin who are holding the foreign citizenship. So what is the meaning of this? That if a person, even that person is not citizen of India, and if that person is holding the OCI card or Overseas Citizens of India card, that person would be having a lot of facilities even though he or she is not Indian citizen. If I take the example, so the famous Bollywood actress, I think Alia Bhatt is not holding Indian citizenship. She had the citizenship of Britain, right? But then also she is living in India. She is using all the facilities in India, right? So this is the example that by seeing anyone, or no, if you are seeing that if someone is living in India, if someone is enjoying facilities in India, easily by seeing you cannot say that whether that person is Indian citizen or not. Understood? So Overseas Citizens of India, they have almost same kind of facilities as we talk about the citizens, but there are some limitations. For example, those persons cannot hold agricultural land in India, or those persons cannot fight for elections, right? So, for example, if Alia Bhatt someday, if she considers that I want to fight in the elections, or I want to hold any constitutional post, she cannot do the same thing. And why she can hold the Britain citizenship? Because her mother holds the citizenship of Britain. That's why on that basis she is also holding the Britain citizenship, but then also she is living in India. So if we consider the eligibility, that who all are eligible for this OCI card, so first thing will be any foreign citizen who were Indian citizen or who have Indian origin parents or grandparents as the Indian citizens. Those kind of persons can hold Indian citizenship. This thing is very important, that this is not available to the citizens or former citizens of Pakistan or Bangladesh. So leaving these 2 countries, other people can hold OCI card in India. Now, if we talk about EOCI card, so what is important in this? See, I think in previous class we discussed about e-passport, right? What is e-passport? Only the chip? So you are saying it will be the physical booklet and it will be having a computer chip, right? If we talk about EOCI card, so EOCI card would not be same as the e-passport, because here in EOCI card it can be completely virtual also. But in e-passport you had the physical booklet and in that you had the chip. But here it can be completely virtual also. You can show on your phone also if you go to the airport. So here earlier OCI card holders received a physical booklet or card, but now government has introduced the provision of digital OCI card. So here you can apply online, you can upload the documents, etc., etc. So here I wanted to just discuss e-passport and EOCI card. EOCI card can be completely virtual, but still e-passports cannot be completely virtual. Still you have the physical booklet. Yes, now let's discuss what are the biggest changes which the ministry have done now. See, earlier what used to happen, if a person have crossed 20 years of age, so after 20 years of age you have to apply for new passport. If you are applying for new passport, then again you have to apply for new OCI booklet also. This was the earlier provision. But now no reissue of OCI booklet is required. So if you are applying for new passport, you receive the new passport, you can update the details online only, and hence your details of OCI card will also be updated. So this is the important provision, and I think this is the only provision which can be asked in prelims. Yes, other new features I think not much required. New features, yes. Now next important article is about the Indian Ocean Dipole. So do you have any idea about Indian Ocean Dipole? Or shall I start from beginning only? Yes? Yes, for what? You have idea. Yes, so please say, explain.
Based on the sea surface temperature. The rainfall
based on the sea surface temperature, rainfall will happen in India. That's what. Okay, see. So let's start. First of all, I will discuss the context. So context is saying that, so you know El Nino, what is El Nino? All of you? If you don't know, then I will start with some basic, that's why. Okay, so let me start with some basic then. I will start from here. You are getting what it is? Which areas are these? You are getting? This is Pacific Ocean, right? This is Indian Ocean. India, Africa, everything. You are getting, right? First, please be clear with the locations. Now, I will start explaining briefly the concept of El Nino, right? I think somewhere here we'll be having equator. Okay, see. Please focus on this Pacific Ocean. Okay, Pacific Ocean. Now, what will happen? There are some kind of winds which are present all over the globe. And of those winds, first of all, I will talk about the winds which are happening in the tropical areas. So there are some kind of easterly winds which are flowing in the tropical regions of the globe. Tropical regions means the countries which are present between Tropic of Cancer as well as Tropic of Capricorn. So for example, somewhere here, this will be the tropical countries. So here I will be discussing, so this is equator, right? 23.5 here, 23.5 here. So this will be some part of tropical region. Now, please focus here. I am focusing on the easterly winds. Easterly winds means which are coming from the eastern direction, right? Now consider these easterly winds are flowing here. And see, this, if I am talking about equator or tropical region, their temperature will be high, right? Their temperature will be high. Temperature will be high, that means water in this region will be very warm. Now, consider easterly winds are coming from here. If easterly winds are coming from here, these winds will try to push this water, right? These winds will try to bring this water this side, right? Because they are coming from east. Now, since they are pushing water to the eastern side, that water will be collected in this region. The water will be pushed from here and water will be collected in this region. Understood? Now, when this warm water is collected in this region, this is already very warm. When water becomes warm, what it will do? It will evaporate, right? When water evaporates, it will rise, right? Here water will evaporate, it will rise. This water which has risen here, now this water will descend somewhere here. Descend means it will come down, it will descend. So, see, if water becomes warm, it will evaporate, it will rise. After rising, it will form clouds, right? And if clouds become heavy, they will fall in the form of rain. So, here it have risen and now here it is falling. Sorry, here it have risen and here rainfall will happen. Understood? Here water have risen, rainfall will happen, and here there will be the condition of descending air. Descending air means here the pressure will be very high, so that air here will not be able to rise. Understood? Why it is happening? Since water is being pushed here, so warm water is here, and since I am pushing surface water here, so the water which was deep here, this water will come up. Why? Because I am pushing the upper water here, so some space is created. So the water which is here down, this water is very, very cold. So this water will come up. Understood? So here warm water, so because of that water will rise, but since here water is cold, that's why pressure is high. Near colder regions, pressure is high. If pressure is high, air cannot rise. And if air cannot rise, rainfall cannot happen. Rainfall is happening here, but here no rainfall. Understood? So here this is kind of cell which is created. Here in this region rainfall is there, here in this region no rainfall is there. So this is a normal condition. Normally this will happen. Now I will discuss, this was the normal year. Now I will discuss El Nino year. So any year will be called as El Nino year when these easterly winds, first of all, maybe they can become weak. If they will become weak, they cannot push more and more water. And if they are not pushing water, both these things will become weak. Second thing what can happen, either they can completely reverse their direction. First thing, either this will become weak or they can completely reverse their direction. Reverse means here there can be rainfall and here can be no rainfall. So if all these things are happening, that year will be considered as El Nino year. See, if I would like to discuss El Nino, I could take 2 or 3 classes, but just for explaining, I am explaining in this way. So here this was the normal year, this is El Nino year. Now, if I am talking about El Nino year, and in El Nino year what will happen? Somewhere here will be less rainfall, right? During the El Nino year, and here will be more rainfall. It is opposite to this. So when here is less rainfall, this thing will affect the Indian subcontinent. So during El Nino year, here there is less rainfall and same thing will happen in India. India will also receive less rainfall during El Nino years. Reasons, it will take time to discuss. For now, please remember, during El Nino years, less monsoon or less rainfall will happen in India. Now, coming to the first part of the context, what the context is saying. So, context is saying that 2026 is going to be El Nino year. That's why less rainfall is happening in 2026. So now you understood what is El Nino year. But the second part of the context says, but the impact of El Nino can be reduced because of the positive cycle of Indian Ocean dipole. So now I will discuss what is Indian Ocean dipole. Then you will understand that what the context is trying to say. You understood El Nino, right? Yes, so now let's discuss the Indian Ocean dipole. So what will happen in El Nino year for the Indian monsoon? Whether rainfall will be good or bad? Now let's discuss the Indian Ocean dipole. So are you able to see this boundary of India? This is India, right? This is Arabia and this is Africa. This is the boundary, right? Now, if I talk about the Indian Ocean dipole, the meaning of this is the movement of air between eastern and western sides of Indian Ocean. So, this is Indian Ocean. This is western side of Indian Ocean. This is eastern side of Indian Ocean. So, if dipole means there are 2 poles. So, these are 2 poles. That's why we say dipole. Why Indian Ocean dipole? Because in Indian Ocean. Now, if I talk about what is the positive phase of Indian dipole, positive means good rainfall will be happening in India. That is the meaning of positive phase. So consider, for example, somewhere here we have equator. And the monsoon winds in India are the southwestern monsoonal winds. This you know, right? That winds will start coming from here, and when they cross the equator, they will go somewhere here. So this is the southwest monsoon. Now monsoon winds are already coming towards India, and if western part of Indian Ocean is hotter than the eastern part of Indian Ocean, if this is hotter, the water will become warm, it will evaporate and it will form clouds. So already monsoon winds were coming from this direction, and already this water is also rising. So these winds will take this water along with them, and hence rainfall will happen in India. This is the positive phase of Indian Ocean dipole. Negative phase means western part of Indian Ocean is cooler than eastern part of Indian Ocean. So here temperature, here it will become high. When the temperature here it becomes high, there will be less rainfall in India. Understood? Positive phase means there will be positive or there will be good rainfall in India. How positive phase? When the western part of Indian Ocean is warmer than eastern part of Indian Ocean. Now combine the context. First part of context says that 2026 was going to happen as El Nino year. That means less rainfall is expected in 2026. Second part of the context says, even if it is El Nino year, if there is positive phase of Indian Ocean dipole, it can counteract the effect of El Nino. So in El Nino we had the less rainfall, but if the phase of Indian Ocean dipole is positive, there will be good rainfall. So some kind of medium or mid-range average rainfall we can have in India. Understood? So I think these were the two important things only. Indian Ocean dipole, yes, we are done with this. We are done with El Nino. Yes, this also we discussed. Okay. Next comes the topic of Hul Divas. So not many things are here in Hul Divas. So let's discuss about the Hul Divas. Why we celebrate this Divas and all these things. So first of all, on which date this Hul Divas is celebrated? So it is celebrated on 30th of June. Why we celebrate Hul Divas? So this Hul Divas is celebrated to commemorate the beginning of Santhal rebellion. Santhal rebellion was also known as Hul. Understood? You might have read about Santhal rebellion in modern India or not till now? You haven't read. You know the Indian struggle, Indian freedom struggle, right? So you can consider that Indian freedom struggle started from Santhal rebellion. You can consider in this way. So Santhal rebellion, see Santhal is a kind of tribe in India. So when Britishers came to India, they tried to take away the land of tribal people. They tried to take away the forest. They tried to take away everything from the tribal people. So there are many tribal uprisings in India. So those tribals tried to fight against the Britishers because they wanted their land, they wanted everything back. So Santhal rebellion is one kind of rebellion. Why this rebellion is important in the history? Because this was the first organized rebellion. Because one thing is you are you have some kind of hatred against the Britishers, you just start fighting without any planning or something. So anyone can do that. But second thing is you will take some time, you will organize yourself, you will plan everything. So why this Santhal rebellion is remembered in the history? Because this was the first organized, this was the first planned rebellion in India against the British authorities. So for the exam, what is important? First of all, the date. So it is celebrated on 30th of June. Now, why it is celebrated? To commemorate the beginning of the Santhal rebellion, or we call as Hul. Now, if we talk about any rebellion, so very important thing for the exam is the leaders which are involved in that rebellion. So these are the four important leaders. First is Sidho Murmu, second is Kanu Murmu, and these two are the female rebellion leaders. These were the sisters, Phulo and Jhano. So these are the four important leaders of Santhal rebellion. Yes. Now next important thing is that where this Santhal rebellion have started. Okay, so this Santhal rebellion have started in Bhognadi, Sahibganj district, which is at present in Jharkhand. These are the small things which can be asked in prelims. So first is the date, second why it was started, why it is being celebrated, next which all leaders are important, and next from which place it started. After that, if we talk about the reasons that why this rebellion have started. So the reasons are very obvious. First is the extortion. That means Britishers were collecting a lot of land revenue from the Santals. They didn't had anything to eat also. Second is the oppressive taxes. Second is the land alienation. You already know that main life or livelihood of the tribals revolve around the forest or revolve around the land only. So they alienated the tribals from the land. Next was the false measurements. False measurements means if I want to collect land revenue from you all, so there could be some basis based on which I will collect land revenue, right? I would do some measurements or I would do anything. So here what Britishers do, they created a false assumption that we are measuring this particular land, and based on this measurement I will be collecting the land revenue. But all those measurements were false. Understood? So based on false measurements, the taxes were collected, and that's why it led to extortion as well as oppression. Yes, so why this is remembered? Because this was the first organized rebellion against the Britishers in India. Yes, so I think that's it for the prelims. Yes, now next article is about the radio tagged white rumped vulture in India. So here the news is that one radio tagged white rumped vulture have died because of electrocution in India. What is electrocution? Died because of electric shock. So here we are discussing about the bird, one bird. So see, for example, this is a bird, and if this bird is very important for the ecosystem, so what we do, we will tie a kind of radio transmitter or a kind of GPS around its neck, so that where the bird flies, we can know the migratory routes, we can know the breeding grounds, nesting grounds, we can track everything. Understood? So here we are talking about white rumped vulture, and that bird we were tracking, that where that bird was going, but unfortunately that bird was electrocuted. This was the news. Now we have to discuss many things. First of all, we will discuss about this white rumped vulture itself, because this is very important for the conservation. So first important thing about any species is its IUCN status. So this bird is critically endangered because around 90% of this bird's population is already lost because of the habitat destruction, because of poaching or anything. 90% is already lost. That's why this bird is considered as critically endangered under IUCN. Next thing about any species, you must know about the distribution, that in which region it is distributed. So mainly it is distributed in the Indian subcontinent only, like India, Nepal, Bangladesh, India and nearby areas of India. And especially if we talk about South India, so the Mudumalai Tiger Reserve hosts one of the last viable breeding populations. So if we talk about India, so especially Mudumalai Tiger Reserve have some of the important populations of white rumped vulture. Now, next thing is why vultures are important for ecosystem. Yes, do you have the answer? Why vultures are important for the ecosystem? Yes? I'm not able to hear. Partially? For religion point of view, he is saying. Oh, but I am asking for the nature. Why vultures are important for the nature?
It eats the dead animals.
Yes, very good. Why vultures are important for the environment? Because they are considered as nature's sanitation workers. Because they eat the dead body, they feed on the dead carcasses, and because of that, bacteria or any kind of microorganism cannot spread in the environment. That's why we consider the vultures as important for the environment. Yes. Now next thing is, yes, before this I would like to discuss one more thing. Yes, see here in the news we discussed that since this white rumped vulture was very important for the environment, right? And that's why we were tracking it through the radio collar, and then unfortunately it got electrocuted. So here I would like to ask one thing, that vulture is considered as a big bird, right? No, its surface area is also big compared to small birds. For example, sparrow, it is comparatively big bird. So here I am giving you a fact that big birds are more prone to electrocution as compared to the small birds. Because generally you see that on that electricity pole or the distribution wires, many small birds could sit. But if any large bird sits there, easily it can get electrocuted. So what is the reason for that? Yes? Yes. So yes, very good. Are you able to understand what he is saying? Yes, see. So for example, this is electricity pole and these are the distribution wires, right? So consider, first of all, I am considering small bird, right? For example, this is a small bird. This small bird will come, it will sit on the wiring, nothing will happen, right? Why? Because if you know that for the flow of electricity, you need some kind of difference in the potential. Similarly, same thing if I say that if I want the water to flow, for the water to flow, you must have some difference in the height, then only water can flow, right? Similarly, I will talk about electricity. If electrons have to flow in the wire, they need some kind of difference. So when a small bird will sit, the feathers of that bird or the feet of that bird are very small. So it can sit just on the one wire. If bird is sitting just on the one wire, there is no difference in the potential. So both feet of the bird will be on the same kind of wiring, no electricity will flow. But now consider some big bird comes, so that big bird will sit, so the feet of that big bird will be spread on the both two wires. Understood? Either the feathers or the feet of the birds will spread on two wires. Two wires are at different electric potential, or you can consider two wires are at different height. If they are at different height, electrons can easily flow, electricity will flow. And if electricity will flow, this electric circuit will be completed. And if electric circuit is completed, electrons will flow. And if circuit is completed, that means electricity will flow from inside the body of vulture. That's why it got electrocuted. So please have a very basic understanding of these things also. If we talk about the small birds, many small birds can sit on the distribution lines, nothing will happen. If we talk about the big birds, accidentally their feet can touch two wires which are at two different electric potentials, and hence electricity can pass through because there are many organs in our body through which electricity can easily pass. Just the thing is, electric circuit is not completed. If anyhow circuit gets completed, we will also get sometimes electrocuted. Understood? Yes, so if we discuss some of the reasons for the vultures to be electrocuted, so one thing we already discussed for the death of vulture, that is electrocution. Next important thing was the diclofenac. Diclofenac was the drug which was used in the cattle. It was used as a pain reliever. But when those cattle died, so vultures used to feed on dead carcasses. So that diclofenac caused the kidney failure in the vultures. That's why I think around in 2006, Indian government banned the use of diclofenac in the cattle. So because of diclofenac, this 90% decline in the vulture population happened because of diclofenac only. This was the main reason for the reduction in the population of vulture. Next was the electrocution, already discussed. Next is the poisoning from the contaminated carcasses, either from diclofenac or any other kind of drug. And next is the habitat destruction and food scarcity. How food scarcity? Either food is not present, or even if food is present, it is contaminated. Yes, next coming to RBI's digital scam compensation pilot scheme. Okay. So here, what Reserve Bank of India has done, RBI has started one pilot project to compensate the victims of digital payment scams in India. And here this pilot project will come in effect from 1st of January and it will run for 1 year initially. Okay, this is not important. Important thing is that RBI has started this scheme for the digital payment scams. So let's discuss what it is. See, earlier, for example, you have some amount of money which is deposited in the bank. Earlier, if that money got stolen, right? So bank would give you the compensation because here the bank was at the fault. You were not at the fault. So earlier you could get the compensation only if the transaction was unauthorized. Unauthorized means you haven't authorized, but somehow your money got stolen. Then in that case, you got the compensation. But now consider a second example. For example, any person is calling you and that person is impersonating like the police officer or any CBI officer, and that person is saying that transfer the money. That person is threatening you to transfer the money. So out of that threat, you transferred the money, right? Now RBI will say that in this case, we will not compensate you. So you will say that, but that person was threatening me, that's why I transferred the money. But RBI will say, even though you transferred that money out of threat, that transaction was authorized because you only authorized the transaction, even though if it was out of threat. So here now what RBI have done, earlier compensation was just for unauthorized transactions, but now compensation will be given to these kind of digital scams also. Understood? In both the cases, RBI will provide you the compensation. But here are some conditions. It's not like if you are always ignorant, then also RBI will keep on providing the compensation. So there are some conditions. But now please remember that from now onwards, at least for next 1 year, the compensation will be provided for digital scams also. Yes. So these were the things I discussed just now. That earlier in 2017 new rules were made, and under those rules, compensation would be provided only for the unauthorized transactions, any technical failure, any kind of thing at which you were not at the fault. In those cases, you could get the compensation. But now here you can get for any other thing. For example, the fraud happened because of the social engineering techniques, for example, digital arrest scam. In those cases, you would be getting the compensation. Yes, so here let's discuss this. So here, earlier the category was only of unauthorized transactions, but after that, now RBI have added one category, that is fraudulent electronic banking transactions. So for all these kind of transactions, you are eligible to get the compensation. What are those transactions? First is the stolen credentials. Because of any social engineering technique, for example, someone is impersonating like your family member or relatives or any CBI officer, and that person is trying to obtain all these things. So under this category, you can get the compensation. Next is the coercion. Just now I discussed about the digital arrest. If any police officer, if any person is calling you saying, I'm police officer, you have to transfer the money. In that case, you can get. Next is the unauthorized transactions. So these were already covered. So these are the two new categories. Yes. Now let's discuss what will be those conditions under which you can get the compensation. Because as I have already discussed, in all the cases you won't get, even if you are ignorant, you won't be getting the compensation. First is, if the money is stolen or if someone is threatening you transfer the money, you must report the fraud within 5 calendar days. Then only you become eligible for the compensation. Next is, when you are reporting the fraud, that reporting must be through a helpline, that is 1930. Then only you become eligible for compensation. Next is, they don't ignore the fraud warnings. Fraud warnings, for example, if you are making the UPI payment, the message will be displayed that no PIN must be entered to receive the money. You must enter the PIN only to send the money. If you are ignoring these kind of warnings, you won't receive compensation. Next thing is, they were not negligent. Negligent means, for example, you have not updated your KYC, you have not updated your mail ID or phone number, then how bank will reach to you? How bank will inform you that something is going to happen? So if you are fulfilling these conditions, then you become eligible for the compensation. Yes, so we are done with this. Yes, how much compensation will be given? This is important for the exam. So maximum amount of money loss which can be covered will be 50,000. If out of threat you have transferred 1 lakh or 2 lakh, then also 50,000 will only be covered. 50,000 is covered. What percentage of compensation you will get? That is 85,000. And the maximum compensation which you can get will be 25,000 only. Understood? For example, you lost 1 lakh rupees and 85% of 1 lakh rupees will be 85,000 rupees. Then also you will be getting maximum of 25,000 rupees only. So these figures are important for the exam, 55,000, 50,000, 25,000. Next thing is, you will be getting compensation only once in your lifetime. Otherwise, you will make it a habit that anyhow some kind of compensation every time I will be getting. So it will be covered only once in lifetime. Yes, so I think this was the example. I think you already understood. So if we talk about the scam amount of 10,000, 85% compensation will be 8,500. So here actual compensation also you will get 8,500 because it is less than 25,000. If we talk about 30,000, 85,000 will be 25,500. But maximum is 25,000 only. And similarly for the 50,000. Here compensation will be 42,500, then also you will be getting 25,000. Yes. Next thing is what if more money is debited after reporting? So for example, within 5 working days, you reported the stealing. But even after reporting, for example, more 20,000 or 30,000 more are stolen from your account. Then what will happen? So then you don't have any liability. Complete liability is on the bank. Then bank will return you the complete money. Now you don't have any liability. Yes, next thing is, yes, this is important for the prelims, that how the compensation will be shared. That maximum 25,000 of compensation, who will give you? So first thing is, so important thing here is that compensation will be shared between 3 banks. First will be the RBI, second will be your bank, and third will be the bank where the fraudster have deposited the money. So these 3 banks will combine that 25,000, they will give you the money. But important thing here is that 3/4 of the compensation will be beared by RBI. But at least remember that only your bank will not be involved in providing the compensation. First will be the RBI, second will be the customer's bank, and third will be the beneficiary bank. Yes, next article is about National Investment Infrastructure Fund. Yes, so before discussing the prelims points about this, let's have a basic understanding about National Investment Infrastructure Fund. So for example, consider that government have the duty or government have the responsibility to build the infrastructure, right? Like the schools, hospitals, highways, airports, etc., etc. But the point is that government do not have enough money to build all the infrastructure. So what government will do? Government will create a fund and government will put some of its own money in the fund. Why government is doing this? So that other investors will get the confidence that since government is only putting the fund here, maybe we can also put the fund here. So government has made the fund so that other investors can also be attracted and other private players can also put money in this fund. And that fund is known as National Investment Infrastructure Fund. So basically this fund will include fund from government as well as fund from private players so that this combined fund can be used for the infrastructure development in India. So this was the basic. Yes, so now let's discuss about this fund. So about NIIF I already discussed that it is government anchored investment platform to mobilize long-term capital for infrastructure. Government anchored means government was the first one to put money in the fund. That's why we call that fund as government anchored. Now let's discuss about other things for the prelims. So first is the headquarters itself. Where are the headquarters of this fund? So the headquarters will be in Mumbai. Next is the nodal ministry. Ministry will be finance, but in that ministry department is also important. Under Ministry of Finance, this is regulated by which department? That will be Department of Economic Affairs. After that, it was established in which year? It was established in 2015. What is the nature of this fund? Nature is Sovereign Wealth Fund. Sovereign Wealth Fund means fund which has been put by the government of India. That's why we call them as sovereign. Next thing is the Government Council of this fund. So governing council of this fund is chaired by the Union Finance Minister. This thing is important for the prelims. I think already it has been asked in some exam that who chairs the Governing Council of National Investment Infrastructure Fund. So it is chaired by Union Finance Minister. Now let's discuss some other key features. First key feature is public-private fund structure. We already discussed that money will be of government also and private players also. Government will hold 49% equity. That is important. Government has the less equity. 51% of the equity will be held by other parties. Next thing will be that this will be SEBI registered alternative investment fund. Now, what is the meaning? What was the requirement to register with SEBI? If any body is registered with SEBI, then the confidence of the foreign players will be more. Because if anything is registered with SEBI, then there are no chances of fraud or scam. So please remember that this is SEBI registered alternative investment fund. Next thing is who all can invest in this fund? So any kind of body, either individuals or any multilateral banks, for example, Asian Development Bank, New Development Bank, any kind of bank can invest in this fund. Yes, one more important thing, there is one more fund, that is National Investment Fund. And here now we were discussing about National Investment Infrastructure Fund. So what is the difference between these two funds? So this fund we already discussed, its main purpose is to fund the infrastructure. Main purpose of this fund is, for example, this is any PSU of Government of India, for example IOCL, BPCL, any PSU. Government has privatized or disinvested this PSU. That means government have given some of those shares to any private player. So if government if giving the shares to anyone, then government will receive the money back, right? If government is selling the shares, I will receive the money back. So the money which I am getting, I will put here, National Investment Fund. So this is the fund for the disinvestment proceeds. Disinvest means I am selling some of my shares, that means I am disinvesting my company. So the money which I will be getting after disinvestment, that money I will be putting here in National Investment Fund. And next thing is, this we already discussed, it was created in 2015, but this is created in 2005. Yes. Next topic is Project Brahmang. Actually, this is very small topic. Just have a basic idea that Project Brahmang is related to which subject. That's it. Yes. So here comes. If we talk about Project Brahmang, so basically Project Brahmang is infrastructure development project under Border Roads Organization. About Project Brahmang, UPSC, if UPSC asks, it will ask very simple question that Project Brahmang is related to what? Or Project Brahmang was in news in which context? At least this, because not many things are important. So Project Brahmang is project under Border Roads Organization. It is the project which is related to infrastructure development in the border areas of the countries. And which border areas it will cover? It will cover 5 districts of Arunachal Pradesh and adjoining border areas of Assam. So basically it will be focusing on the infrastructure development in the northeastern border areas of India. This is the main important thing. Next thing, organization I already discussed that it comes under Border Roads Organization. And apart from that, I don't think much is important in this article. Okay, I think I already discussed this. Yes, please try to answer this question. D. No doubt, right? This. D, right? Yes, any other answer? What? B. D. You said some other answer. B. You are saying B 1 and 2. OTP phishing is also social engineering technique only, no? Social engineering means the person in front is trying to manipulate you through the social behavior. So this OTP phishing can also be done through social engineering. No doubt, right? Yes. Next comes the topic about the Collegium of Supreme Court. So here, context is not much important. Context says Justice Narasimha will be joining Supreme Court Collegium as Justice Maheshwari is retiring. So here, I will start discussing about the Supreme Court Collegium. So basically, the purpose of Supreme Court Collegium is to recommend the name of judges for the Supreme Court, right? So here, Supreme Court Collegium will be recommending the names to the President of India, and then final appointment will be done by the President of India. So before discussing that complete process, first of all, discuss about the Collegium system. So here, this is India's judicial mechanism for appointment as well as transferring of judges. Please remember, Collegium system in India focuses on two things. First is the transfer of judges. Second is the appointment of judges to Supreme Court as well as High Court. But Supreme Court have separate Collegium, High Court have separate Collegium. Second thing is, please note that this is not a constitutional provision. The word Collegium is not mentioned in the Constitution. UPSC confuses with these statements that consider the following statements with respect to Collegium. First thing, the word Collegium is defined in the Constitution. No, word Collegium is not mentioned in the Constitution. So how this Collegium have evolved? It has evolved through various Supreme Court judgments, and those cases are known as three judges case. So briefly, we will discuss about three judges case. Before discussing about three judges case, please focus on two articles. And these articles are very important for the exam also. First, I will discuss about Article 124 of the Constitution. What is the subject of Article 124? It says, every judge of the Supreme Court shall be appointed by the President by warrant under his hand and seal. Please focus on this, after consultation with such of the judges of Supreme Court and High Court, so on and so forth. So Article 124 deals with the appointment of judges in Supreme Court. It is saying that President of India have to consult, please focus on this word consultation, with some of the judges of Supreme Court and High Court for the appointment. Now focus on the Article 127 of the Constitution. Sorry, 127 not, focus on Article 217 of the Constitution. It says, every judge of the High Court shall be appointed by the President after consultation with the Chief Justice of India, Governor and other judges. So what Article 124 was saying? It was related to appointment of Supreme Court of Judges. Article 217 is relating to the appointment of High Court judges. Both the article says that appointment of judges will be done by the President of India in consultation with few personalities. Understood? Now, we will start our judges case. These are the three judges case. First judge case happened in 1981. First judge case said, Supreme Court held that in appointment of a judge of Supreme Court or High Court, the word consultation in Article 124 and 217 does not mean concurrence. You focused on that word consultation, right? So in this judge case, Supreme Court has said, when President of India have to consult some of the judges of Supreme Court and High Court, consultation does not mean concurrence. Concurrence means anything is binding. Supreme Court has said that there is no binding responsibility on the President to accept the advice of the other judges of Supreme Court or High Court. Concurrence means you have to do that. But advisory means you can do it or you cannot do it. So first judge case said there is no necessity of President to accept the advice of other judges of Supreme Court or High Court. Coming to the second judge's case, which happened in 1993. In second judge's case, Supreme Court said consultation actually meant the concurrence. That means President cannot appoint the judges of Supreme Court or High Court without the consultation of other judges. Consultation means President have to accept the advice. It is not voluntary. Here what Supreme Court said, before giving the advice, Chief Justice of India must consult two senior most judges. Right? So here President have to consult Chief Justice of India along with two senior most judges. This is the final case. That was third judge case. Third judge case said, Supreme Court have expanded the collegium which included Chief Justice of India and four senior most judges. and from here the entire collegium system started. So now, if we talk about the collegium system of Supreme Court, it consists of Chief Justice of India as well as 4 senior most judges. So total 5 judges in the collegium. Understood? Now this collegium system is in Supreme Court also, it is in High Court also. This news was of Supreme Court, that's why we discussed about Supreme Court. In Supreme Court we have Chief Justice plus 4 senior most judges. In High Court we have Chief Justice of High Court plus 2 senior most judges. Understood? Here CJI plus 4, here Chief Justice plus 2. Now quickly let's discuss how government is involved here. So this is collegium, that means Chief Justice of India plus 4. This collegium will give some of the names to the President. President, that means indirectly government is controlling, because President works on the aid and advice of Council of Ministers. So collegium has given the names. Now, if government have any problem with any of the name, government can return that letter back that please reconsider these names. But if collegium have sent back again the same list, government have to accept it. So this collegium can give the recommendation. Government is the final body which will appoint the judges. Government, that means president will appoint it, but indirectly government will appoint. Yes, now coming to the next topic, that is Rajouri Banda diversion scheme. Yes, so here the news is that we have this one diversion scheme in India, that is Rajouri Banda diversion scheme. This is a kind of scheme which is involving Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. So the context is the chief ministers of these 3 states have had a discussion with Union Jal Shakti Minister. This is the context, but now let's discuss what all things are important for the exam. See, first of all, let's discuss about what is the meaning of the diversion scheme. See, there are 2 things. One thing is the diversion scheme and second thing is the dam. Maybe the function would look same, but they are entirely different. Diversion scheme means, see, just now I discussed this scheme involves 3 states. What are those 3 states? Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh as well as Telangana. Now, what these states are doing, see, here, first thing is we have one dam, that is Tungabhadra Dam. Right? We have Tungabhadra Dam. I think you can understand from this diagram. Yes, understand from here. See, are you able to see this? Are you able to see this? Tungabhadra Reservoir? Yes. So this Tungabhadra Reservoir is located in Karnataka, right? Now, Tungabhadra Reservoir, that means this is Tungabhadra Dam. What is the basic purpose of dam? To store the water which can be used for different purposes. Now, please don't confuse that Rajouri Banda diversion scheme with Tungabhadra Reservoir, because that scheme is also built on Tungabhadra River only, but these 2 things are different. Tungabhadra Reservoir is located on Tungabhadra River, it is located in Karnataka. Now, somewhere here at the intersection of these 3 states is located Rajouri Banda diversion scheme. Main purpose of Tungabhadra Dam was to store water and to use that water for different purposes. The main purpose of diversion scheme is to just divert the flow of river. Here we are not building the dams. Here we are just creating the diversion channels so that water can go to all the 3 states. So instead of creating 3 dams in the 3 states, we are just creating the diversion channels. Tungabhadra Dam is here. The water of Tungabhadra River will flow from here, and finally 3 diversion channels will be created here, and hence water can go through all the 3 states. So this is the basic purpose of Rajouri Banda diversion scheme. Yes, so I think this I already discussed, that this diversion scheme is located on Tungabhadra River. It is located in Rajouri Banda village in Raichur district of Karnataka. And the main objective is to divert the river water into canals for irrigation of drought prone areas. So please remember, here we are not building the dams, here we are just building the diversion channels. Do you have idea of Farakka Barrage in India? Where the Farakka Barrage is built? It is built in Kolkata. You don't have any idea? Okay, then I will not confuse. Let it be. Yes, since this scheme is built on Tungabhadra River, so let's have a basic discussion of this Tungabhadra River. So first thing is Tungabhadra River is the right bank tributary of Krishna River. Right bank tributary means if Krishna River is flowing in this direction, then what the rivers will join itself from the right direction. That will be right bank. So it is based on in which direction river is going. On that basis, you will decide what is right bank, what is left bank. If the river flow was in this direction, then this would be the right bank. So Tungabhadra is the right bank tributary of river Krishna. So first of all, let's see the location of river. So this is Tungabhadra, this is Krishna river. This is the flow of the river. This will be the mouth of the river. So since it is flowing in this direction, and Tungabhadra is joining it in from the right direction. That's why we consider it as a right bank tributary. Yes, after that, the river originates as the two separate rivers, Tunga and Bhadra in the Western Ghats. So see, focus here. See, focus here. Here we have Tunga stream and we have Bhadra stream. Both these streams are rising from the Western Ghats. Now these streams will join in a particular region. They will form Tungabhadra. So here you have to remember two locations. First location where Tunga and Bhadra join and they become Tungabhadra. And second region you have to remember where Tungabhadra joins river Krishna. These two locations are important. Yes. So about Tunga and Bhadra I already discussed. Now focus. The two streams, that is Tunga and Bhadra, they will merge near Kurli. Kurli is a village near Shivmoga city in Karnataka. So Kurli is a region where Tunga and Bhadra join and they form Tungabhadra. Now we will discuss the region where Tungabhadra will join river Krishna. So Tungabhadra joins river Krishna in Sangamaleshwaram in Kurnool district of Andhra Pradesh. So Tunga and Bhadra form Tungabhadra in Karnataka and Tungabhadra joins Krishna in Andhra Pradesh. Yes, next important thing is, if we discuss from the cultural perspective, so important ancient city, that is Hampi. Hampi is located on the banks of river Tungabhadra. Why I am discussing this Hampi? Because I think one PYQ was asked. Yes, this PYQ is of 2023. So the PYQ was very simple. It was asking who among the following rulers of Vijayanagar Empire constructed a large dam across Tungabhadra river. So here the question was of ancient history. That's why the name of emperors were asked. But here the question focused on river Tungabhadra and question focused on Vijayanagar Empire. That's why if any historical perspective is also related to geography, you have to know that. So since we were discussing about Tungabhadra, you must know that ancient city, that is Hampi, which used to be the capital of Vijayanagar Empire, is on the banks of river Tungabhadra. I think this is not important. Yes. Yes, now this topic is about the new rules of RBI related to upper layer non-banking financial companies in India. Yes. So here the context says the Reserve Bank of India have revised the rules for upper layer non-banking financial companies in India. This is the first point. Second, the article says the changes have reopened the debate on whether Tata Sons have to launch the initial public offerings or not. So many things we have to discuss here. First thing we will discuss, what are the rules which are changed by RBI related to non-banking financial companies in India. Now before that, please have a basic idea about the NBFCs in India. See, if we talk about NBFC and a bank, so see, both these entities can provide loans to the public, right? But the thing here is, if you want loan from the banks, your credit score must be very good, right? If your credit score is not good, it would be difficult to get loans. But then you can get loans from the NBFCs. Because NBFCs, the eligibility criteria is not very strict. NBFCs can give loan to any startups also. Getting loans from bank becomes very difficult, right? So if you are not able to get the loan, if you are not eligible under the banking criteria, if you are new to the market, you don't know how to take the loans, if you are from any MSME, you are from any new industry, in all these cases, NBFCs can provide you the loans. If you want to take loans from the banks, you have to do a lot of documentation, you have to do a lot of formalities. Those things become very easy in the NBFCs. So this is the importance of non-banking financial companies in India. And because of these importance, RBI have put strict regulations on NBFCs in India. Now starting the article. Yes, so quickly, first of all, let's discuss about the NBFCs in India. First thing is, since they are companies, they are non-banking, but they are companies. So NBFC is a company which is registered under the Companies Act. And what all things NBFCs can do? NBFCs can provide loans and advances. They can purchase the shares, they can purchase the stocks, bonds, etc. All those things which banks can do, NBFCs can also do. Next thing is, which will be the regulating agency of NBFC? This is very important. Yes? So see, not all the NBFCs are regulated by RBI in India. Mostly they are regulated by RBI, but they can be regulated by other agencies also. For example, SEBI, if there is any agency related to insurance, it will be regulated by ADAI. So if I give you the statement that all the NBFCs comes under RBI, so that answer will be wrong. Mostly, but mostly NBFCs are regulated by RBI. Yes, quickly we discuss the difference between banks and NBFCs. So first thing is that this is true that NBFCs can provide loans, but NBFCs cannot accept the demand deposits. Demand deposits means the deposits which are payable on demand. If you want urgently, if you want to take back your deposits, you can do it in banks. NBFCs cannot do that because they focus on the long-term deposits. Next thing is NBFCs do not part of the payment and settlement system. That means you cannot open a savings bank account in NBFCs and you cannot ask NBFCs to pay you in the form of check. You cannot do that in NBFCs. Next thing is deposit insurance facility is not available in NBFCs. For example, you have your long-term deposit in the NBFC and something happens, someone have hacked your system or some robbery has happened, then NBFC will not give your money back. But if that thing was in bank, banks would compensate you. One exception is there that it is true that demand deposits cannot happen in NBFCs, but long-term deposits are possible in some of the NBFCs in India. So if I give the statement, no NBFC can accept any kind of deposit, that will be wrong. NBFCs cannot accept demand deposits, but long-term deposits can be accepted by some of the NBFCs in India. Yes, let's discuss about the regulations of NBFCs. Because the context said RBI have made the regulations of upper layer NBFCs more strict in India, right? In the context we read. So context was mentioning the upper layer NBFCs. So let's focus on this. So this is the level of regulation. As you move up in the pyramid, that means regulations will increase. So these are the base layer NBFCs, which are just doing their job, accepting some kind of deposits, not much harmful for India. Next comes the middle layer N. So how this layer is decided? This layer is decided based on your size, based on the size of your company. And how the size of your company will be decided? It will be decided based on the loans and advances what you are giving. If you have given lot of loans to lot of companies, then you are more at risk, right? Because the money what you are giving, that money is of people, right? And generally NBFCs give loans and advances at least for 15 to 20 years. So the entire money of the citizens is blocked, right? So that's why when you move up in the ladder, regulations also increase. So if you are middle layer NBFC, that means you have given significant amount of money in the form of loans and advances, and RBI, the regulations of RBI will be strict. And for the upper layer NBFCs, they have the strictest layer of regulation. Because these are the NBFCs which are holding a lot of money and they have given a lot of advances. This top layer, virtually in this top layer, no NBFC must be there because this is the NBFC which is most harmful for India. So here, these are just the 3 layers of regulation. This is the top layer which RBI has made, because RBI have to ensure that no NBFC must come here. Because if any NBFC is coming here, RBI will just stop the functioning of that NBFC. So this will be the most harmful NBFC if it comes in the top layer. So only there are 3 layers of regulation: base layer, middle layer, as well as upper layer of NBFC. Yes. So what RBI have changed? Let's see if we have missed anything. Yes. So see, just now I discussed that what is the criteria in which you classify the middle layer, base layer, or the upper layer NBFC. So earlier what RBI used to do, earlier many factors were considered. For example, size, for example, interconnectedness, leverage, etc. Size means the loans and advances you are giving. Now RBI have simplified the rule. RBI has said any NBFC will be classified as upper layer if it has the qualifying assets of 1 lakh crore or more. If you have given the loans and advances of 1 lakh crore or more, you will come under the layer of upper layer NBFC, and hence the regulations of RBI will increase. That's it. This is the main change. Earlier these many factors were considered, but now if your qualifying assets are 1 lakh crore or more, then you will come under upper layer NBFC. Yes, one more thing. In the context, we discussed second thing, right? What was that second thing? Do you remember what we discussed in the context? See, here we discussed second thing. The changes which RBI have made, these changes have reopened the debate whether Tata Sons will have to launch the initial public offering or not. This was the second thing, right? Please try to understand the statement first. This statement is saying here the changes which RBI have made, based on that changes, we have to decide now that Tata Sons will be launching the initial public offering or not. Meaning of this is, if any NBFC is coming under upper layer NBFC category, then it is mandatory for that NBFC to launch initial public offering. You know what is initial public offering? You don't know. You don't know. Yes?
Any company, it will issue the shares and the direct will be purchased by the public.
That is initial public offering. Are you understood? For example, till now I haven't released any of my shares to the public. So in that way, no regulatory agency in the country is regulating me, because that is my own company. But if I want the public to invest money in my company, I have to issue some shares in the public. And if I am issuing shares in the public, then RBI, SEBI, all the regulatory agency will be coming to regulate me. So here RBI is saying, if you are coming under the category of upper layer NBFC, then it is must for you that you have to release the initial public offering. Understood? So this topic of Tata Sons as it is not important. I just wanted to explain that why this topic was in news, because there were discussions in the news that if Tata Sons have the qualifying assets of more than 1 lakh crore, then they will be coming under this upper layer NBFC, and then they have to issue initial public offering, and hence they will be coming under the regulations of RBI and SEBI. Yes, please answer the question. What was the question? All of you, see. Huh? D. That means 1, 2, 3. Who is saying B? B. So here the answers are D, that means 1, 2, 3, and B, that is 2, 3. Any other answer? C. So I will write A also then. C, that means 1 and 3. Okay, so I will start. Consider the following statements regarding Rajoli Bandar diversion scheme. First is, it is an interstate irrigation project. Yes? It is not specifically irrigation project. It's incorrect, no? Second is, it is built across Tungabhadra river. Correct. No, see, this first statement, it will be correct only. The diversion is used for the irrigation only, no? Interstate, that means many states are involved, and irrigation means why we are doing diversion. We are doing diversion for the irrigation, for the drought prone areas. So sorry, this first statement will be correct. Second will be, it is built across Tungabhadra river. Third is, it benefits Karnataka, Telangana and Andhra. So answer will be D. Huh? Everyone? No doubt?
C.
21. Okay.
C. B.
No doubt, right? HPV vaccine. Done. Any doubt? Okay then, thank you.